We end up chapter 2 in Daniel last week with Nebuchadnezzar having this spiritual revival of sorts. He had a dream. It was disturbing him. He brings in the wise men. He says, okay, here's the deal. I need you to tell me what the dream was. I'm not going to tell you. You tell me what the dream was and interpret it. And if you don't, I'm going to kill you all. I'm going to tear you all apart limb from limb and make your houses into a big garbage dump. Basically what he says. And Daniel, by the grace of God, is able to do that. And in response to that, the chapter ends with Nebuchadnezzar having this revival of sorts. In verse 46 of chapter 2, he says, Then King Nebuchadnezzar fell face down, worshipped Daniel, and gave orders to present an offering and incense to him. The king said to Daniel, Your God is indeed God of gods, Lord of lords, and a revealer of mysteries, since you were able to reveal this mystery. Big revival moment for Nebuchadnezzar. Now, the problem is we don't know how long this lasted. Was it a week? Was it a month? Was it 2 years? I don't know. But we do know chapter 3 starts with a situation that doesn't look like Nebuchadnezzar still has this little revival going on. Because verse 1 says, King Nebuchadnezzar made a gold statue, 90 feet high, 9 feet wide. He set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. So now he's building a big statue. King Nebuchadnezzar sent word to assemble the satraps, the prefects, the governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the rulers in the provinces to attend the dedication of the statue King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. So think of all the state and federal employees, all of the country. We're all going to come together and have this big conference, and I have this cool statue, and we're going to have a grand beginning. I want you to see my statue. It's going to be really great. Verse 3 says, So the satraps, the prefects, the governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the rulers of the provinces assembled for this great conference, right? And for the dedication of the statue the king had set up. Then they stood before the statue Nebuchadnezzar had set up. So they assembled. They're all like, well, here we are. Now, what are we doing? It is really great. And we find out in verse 4, a herald loudly proclaimed, People of every nation and language, you are commanded. Remember, they were bringing in people from all kinds of countries, putting them in re-education camps, setting them up in their government. So they have people from all over the world that are part of this group. People of every nation, language, you are commanded, when you hear the sound of the horn, the flute, the zither, the lyre, the harp, the drum, and every kind of music, you're to fall face down and worship the gold statue that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. But whoever does not fall down and worship will immediately be thrown into a furnace of blazing fire. Well, I guess the revival's not going real well right now for Nebuchadnezzar here. So verse 7 says, Therefore, when all the people heard the sound of the horn, the flute, the zither, the lyre, the harp, and every kind of music, people of every nation and language, what'd they do? They fell down and worshiped the gold statue that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. So Nebuchadnezzar went from Daniel, your God is the God above all gods. It is clear to me, he revealed to you my dream and the interpretation. There is no God like your God. He went from that to, hey, why don't we go ahead and build a statue and make everybody bow down before it? If they don't, I'll kill them. That's a pretty big turnaround. And before you get too judgmental on Nebuchadnezzar, haven't you maybe done that too? Not to that extreme, but I think we've all probably done that before. How many times have you made a big commitment to Christ? Maybe in one of our prayer rooms, maybe at a sermon time you've listened to or been a part of, or Bible study. Maybe you just felt the Spirit speaking something to you and you're like, okay, God, this is what I'm going to do from here forward. I'm going to stop that sin, or I'm going to live this way, or I'm going to read this much Bible, or pray that often, or whatever it is. You made some commitment and you meant every word of that commitment. I'm not going to do that, or I'm going to start doing this, or whatever. And you were sincere. And then a few weeks go by, a few months go by, and you find yourself at the same place you were before you made the commitment. That could be what's going on with Nebuchadnezzar. Like, I had this great moment, God moment, and then it's like, never mind. I got busy with the career. I'm a king, conqueror of the world. It could be that, or it could be that's just a natural overflow of him being raised in a culture that worships every god you can think of. I mean, they had all the gods, they threw them in a bucket, and they're gods for everything, gods all over the place. So it wasn't, in his mind, inconsistent to say Yahweh is above all, and say, yeah, but we're going to do this statue too. This would be great, So it wasn't necessarily inconsistent in his mind, probably, because of the way he was raised. Now, this statue was 90 foot tall, 9 foot wide, so very narrow and very, very tall. I kind of think of a Washington Monument, but not nearly that big, not nearly that tall. And people have debated what it might look like. It could be like an abstract, like maybe it's a big square, maybe it was some, whatever that thing is, that my beautiful drawing of an odd shape. Maybe it was just something like that. Or if you ever been to the Papa John art little park downtown, maybe it was something like one of the things you see on there. If you hit that next slide, I think it has a picture from the Papa John park, maybe, possibly. Maybe, possibly. All right. Honestly, though, it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter what the shape was. Some think it could be the big major god of Babylon, Marduk. Some believe it could be the statue that Nebuchadnezzar had dreamt in chapter 2. Like maybe he's like, okay, kind of wrote it out or had an artist and say, okay, now make this. It could have been that. But honestly, it doesn't really matter because the point is, whatever shape it was, whatever it looked like, he wanted everyone to bow down to it and worship it, which wouldn't be a big deal for a lot of people at that time in that culture, even people from other countries, because like I said, they just had gods for everything. So it's like, oh, it's another god. Oh, who knew, right? Okay, well, let's worship the statue. Okay, why not? But it would be a huge deal for anyone who was raised under Jewish law, who was a follower of Yahweh. The first 3 commandments of the 10 commandments specifically talk about this and about worshiping other gods. Number 1, do not have other gods beside me. Well, that would include an idol, a big statue that's 90 foot tall, 9 foot wide. The second commandment, do not make an idol for yourself, whether in the shape of anything in the heavens above or the earth below or the waters underneath it. So whatever shape, doesn't matter. Don't make an idol. Don't make an idol. Second commandment. The third, do not bow in worship to them. Do not serve them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God. What Nebuchadnezzar is asking everyone to do of his governing officials is break the first 3 commandments, which again, for most people, like whatever, it's just what the Jewish people believe. But if you're Jewish and you've been brought into the captivity into Babylon, but you were raised under the law, you understand it, you know, believe me, you knew the 10 commandments. You had the Old Testament memorized. That was part of their training as children. They had the whole Old Testament that was written at that point memorized, the law, the Pentateuch. It was just, they knew it. And so there they are, being told to bow before the statue, and you have those in the Jewish faith going, that's a god before Yahweh. That is an idol, and he's asking us to bow. I can't do any of that. I just can't. I can't. So again, it doesn't matter what the shape of the statue is. A God-fearing person will not bow down before that idol and worship it. They can do that for no one other than God himself. Now just for fun, we're going to say that the statue was the Nebuchadnezzar, the dream that Nebuchadnezzar had. We'll say that. And I was kind of digging around this week thinking, okay, what did that look like? Comparing it by size. And I thought, wait a minute, I've done this before. And so I looked back, and it was in 2018, we actually looked at this text, and I did some research then, or comparisons, as to what this would be. So it was pretty easy. I already did it. Why do it again, right? And so to give you an idea, the statue, we're talking 90 foot tall, 9 foot wide. If you put its feet at that wall there, and it would go all the way, it would blow past the wall here and it'd go to the outside of the building. His head would pretty much hit the tip of the building. So if you want a good idea before you go home, go over here and lay on the floor, put your feet against the wall, and kind of look up, and it'd be like, that's what it would kind of look like. You just have to use your imagination a little bit, but that would be pretty much exactly what it would have looked like for them to be in that plane looking at that statue. A little more context, a Statue of Liberty, maybe you've seen that before, is a 305-foot tall statue, making Nebuchadnezzar's a little under a third of that size. Now, we don't know if it had a base like Statue of Liberty has, all these cement and brick and all that stuff, and then the statue's on top. So maybe it had that too. We don't know. It doesn't tell us that. Maybe the closest, and this is what I found back in 2018, I forgot all about this, it was really convenient. The water tower, those of you familiar, there's a water tower on 48th and Hickman right in that area. It's 110 feet tall, at least according to the World Wide Web, which never lies. And so that's just 20 feet taller than Nebuchadnezzar's statue. So back in 2018, I ran out and took a picture of myself next to the water tower and it would look a lot like that. Of course, that's a lot wider, so I took out the water tower and put in our statue of Nebuchadnezzar's dream. It would have looked at something-ish like that. Point is, it's pretty significant in size. It's pretty large. It's very imposing. Out in the middle of the desert, you're looking up, go, whoa, there it is, this big thing sticking out, this big glistening in the sun, shiny statue thing. The people at this event are all the government officials in the land. Some were raised in Babylon, so they're used to all this. Some were conquered and brought to Babylon and put through those re-education camps we talked about in chapter 1 when they had the food issue. So there's at least several hundred, potentially a few thousand people that are gathered around this statue, and they're all commanded to bow down when they hear the band, and if you don't, you'll be thrown in the furnace and you'll die. Now, if you thought being drugged to church as a child was extreme, this is like next level. You're going to bow or die. I mean, this is what's going on here. The furnace probably looked something like this. These are actual like kilns from that era, reconstructed and put together. Because if you think about it, they would have built these kilns so they could make bricks for the statues. They could melt the metals, and so it was already right there. I don't think Nebuchadnezzar thought to himself, "We're going to build furnaces so we can kill people." He's like, "Hey, isn't this convenient? We have furnaces. Let's kill people." I mean, it was already there, already part of the site, and it's what it would have looked like. And as the story goes, the band starts to play. Everyone in the crowd obediently obeys the government because that's what you're supposed to do, right? They're not interested in dying. They're just, the government says to do it, we're going to jump in, and they bow down to the ground, and they worship the statue. Hundreds, maybe thousands of people lying face down on the ground, except for 3 guys awkwardly standing there going like, we can't do this. Now, Daniel's, who we don't know where he's at, he's obviously not here at this setting. But these are like the same 3 of the 4 guys who said, yeah, we can't eat all this food that's, that goes against the law. We can't eat pork. We can't, all these things that we can't eat, and it's part of the king's table from chapter 1. We can't do that. And they had a special diet, and they did well. And now here they are again saying, I understand that's the law. I understand my life's on the line. We can't bow. Now, wouldn't you be tempted to at least say, I'm just going to bow. God knows in my heart I'm not worshiping. Seems like a compromise we might make today. It's just once. The dedication will be done. We'll go on with our life. No, they're like, no, God said don't do that. The top 3 commandments, the first 3 commandments, saying, I can't. We can't bow to this. Well, there's a group of Karens there, and they report the 3 men to the king, and king gets mad. It's kind of like, have you ever been in like a junior high, middle school class, and said, Johnny's not closing his eyes when he's praying. It's like, well, how do you know that? That doesn't, what? That's kind of what's going on here. Well, how do you know they're standing? You should have been bowing down, look at the statue, right? But they're like, they notice that they're standing. So they report it. In verse 8, it says, the Chaldeans took this occasion to come forward and maliciously accuse the Jews. They said to King Nebuchadnezzar, may the king live forever. You as king have issued a decree that everyone who hears the sound of the horn, the flute, the zither, the lyre, the harp, the drum, and every kind of music must fall and worship the gold statue. Whoever does not fall down and worship will be thrown into a furnace of blazing fire. There are some Jews you have appointed to manage the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These have ignored you, the king. They do not serve your gods or worship the gold statue you have set at. All right? Well, the king takes note of that, and he's like, they're also extremely valuable to him. They're high officials. I mean, they're very effective. If you remember from chapter 1, they're like 10 times smarter than everybody around them. God had just blessed them with wisdom and everything because of their obedience to him. And obviously, they didn't care about the statue. They just wanted to create a mess. They just wanted to create chaos. They wanted to get those guys out of the way. Maybe they want their job. Who knows what's going on here? But in verse 13, it says, in a furious rage, Nebuchadnezzar gave orders to bring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So these men were brought before the king. Nebuchadnezzar asked them, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, is it true that you don't serve my gods or worship the gold statue I have set up? And they're like, yeah, remember when you said Yahweh is better than all of them? Like, yeah, he still is, but He says, now if you're ready, I'm going to give you another shot here. When you hear the sound of the horn, the flute, the zither, the lyre, the harp, the drum, and every kind of music, fall down and worship the statue I made. But if you don't worship it, you will immediately be thrown into a furnace of blazing fire. And who is the God who can rescue you from my power? Nebuchadnezzar just admitted he doesn't even believe in these gods, right? All this bucket of gods they serve, none of them can save you from me, because I'm going to throw you in a fire. What God can save you from that? That's a common mistake of unbelievers, assuming they have more authority than God, by the way. So he gives them that chance. He asks them the question, and I love their answer. In verse 16, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to the king, Nebuchadnezzar, we don't need to give you an answer to this question. We're not going to even bother to answer you, sir. You're going to see it. You're going to see the answer. Right? Just watch. If the God we serve exists, then he can rescue us from the furnace of blazing fire. And he can rescue us from the power of you, the king. But even if he does not rescue us, we want you as king to know we will not serve your gods or worship the gold statue you set up. Bold. Bold. God's bigger than you. He's either going to save us, if he doesn't, whatever. Either way, we're not going to violate these top 3 commandments. It's not going to happen. Just not going to happen. This infuriates the king. Verse 19, Nebuchadnezzar was filled with rage. The expression on his face changed toward Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Again, these are valuable to him. He gave orders to heat the furnace 7 times more than was customary. He commanded some of the best soldiers in his army to tie up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to throw them into the furnace of the blazing fire. So these men in their trousers, robes, and head coverings and other clothes were tied up, thrown into the furnace of blazing fire. Since the king's command was so urgent and the fire extremely hot, the raging flames killed those men who carried up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And these 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell bound into the furnace of blazing fire. The fall itself probably could have killed them, or at least injured them if they couldn't. They were tied up and thrown and landed. They'd been messed up there. I guess the king showed them a thing or two, or maybe not, because verse 24 says King Nebuchadnezzar jumped up in alarm. He's like, "Well, wait a minute." He said to his advisors, "Didn't we throw 3 men bound into the fire?" "Yes, of course, your majesty," they replied to the king. He examined, "Well, look, I see 4 men, not tied, walking around in the fire, unharmed, and the 4th looks like a son of the gods." Nebuchadnezzar approached the door of the furnace of blazing fire and called, "Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, you servants of the Most High God." Oh, now you remember. "Come out." So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out of the fire. When the satraps, prefects, governors, the king's advisors gathered around, they saw that the fire had no effect on the bodies of these men. Not a hair on their heads was singed. Their robes were unaffected, and there was no smell of fire on them. Nebuchadnezzar explained, "Praise to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He sent his angel and rescued his servants who trusted him. They violated the king's command and risked their lives rather than serve or worship any god except their own God. Therefore, I issue a decree that anyone of any people, nation, or language who says anything offensive against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego will be torn limb from limb and his house made a garbage dump." Sounds kind of like the last chapter, right? It's kind of a habit of his. "For there is no other God who is able to deliver like this." For a moment here, he says, "I admit it. There is a God who can defeat me, who has more authority," right? Then the king rewarded Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. Man, that's a great story. I wanted to read it. That's a lot of reading, but Daniel's kind of heavy that way. I don't want to just tell the story and skim over it. I want you to hear it. I want you to hear it straight from the word. And there are 3 quick lessons I have from this. Pro tips, we'll call them, of what we can learn about living out our faith from Daniel chapter 3 here. And the first one is never compromise even if everybody else is doing it. As a believer, as a Christian, as a person who believes in the same God that they follow, the Yahweh, right? Never compromise even if everyone else is doing it. Again, these 3 men were standing alone. Together, alone. We will not bow. Hundreds, maybe thousands of people had dropped to their knees, put their face to the ground. Every ruler, the cream of the crop, the top people, the rulers, the leaders, every person of authority in the land bowing to this golden statue when the music played. Whether they believed in the idol or not, whether they believed it had any authority or not over them, it didn't matter. They chose to do it. The king said to do it, so they just did it. They were just doing what everybody else was doing. They were going with the flow, bowing to the pressure, again, wanting to save their lives, but they just thought, of course, we'll do it, because that's what we do. They just all fell down and bowed and worshiped. This is a great reminder for Christians that as our culture becomes more and more pagan, and it's not getting better, it's getting more and more pagan all the time, more and more unbelievers all the time, right? That there will be opportunities that you will face in the coming year, in the coming years, the rest of your life, where employers might ask you to compromise your faith, where politicians or political parties might ask you to compromise your convictions and vote for them just because, where family members or friends will pressure you to live differently than what the Bible says. It's going to come from all sides, from all over the place. There'll be all kinds of pressure to live differently than what Scripture says. It's been a number of years ago. I sat down with a young Christian couple. He was working as a mechanic in a local mechanic shop, and we were in the living room. And he young couple, young family. He's the sole income winner of the family, so everything was kind of dependent on him. It's like this was everything. And you're at that young age. You're trying to figure out what's right. You want to do what's right, and you're also trying to provide for the family. All this stuff's going on, right? And he was talking to us, Cheryl and I were there, and he was saying, like, the owner of this auto shop was telling him, you have to find things that aren't wrong and tell the customers it's wrong, so that we need more money. I need you to generate more cash. So find something, just lie to him, we don't care, just tell him it needs a replacement, even if it doesn't matter. And he's like, I can't, so they had conversations, and he's like, no, you don't understand, your job is on the line. I will not keep you because I need X amount of dollars per vehicle or whatever, whatever their thing was. And he came and he was just struggling, like, what do I do? What do we do? We lose the house, I'm the source of food, I'm everything, but I don't really know what to do. And it was eating at him. He knew it was wrong, but he wanted to honor God. And it was kind of coming to a boiling point in his mind, and he finally decided, you know what, I've got to just resign, I've got to leave. And so he did that, started his own auto shop. That was a few decades ago now, and thrived there. But man, that was a tough moment. Those were some tough weeks as he was trying to decide how in the world has he wade through this. Now he can look back and say, so glad he did it, but it wasn't so easy at the time. It took courage. The second thing, never be intimidated by the threats of an unbeliever. You've been threatened, just don't be intimidated by that. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were threatened with their lives. My friend was threatened with his job. Maybe you have been too before. Who knows what you might be threatened with in the future? Just don't be intimidated. Just like, yeah, whatever. I'll follow God. Now, when you do that, you have to have the third pro tip down. Because I'd like to tell you, if you just threaten it, then you're going to be the guy who gets rescued from the fire. That's not always the case. Stephen was stoned to death. There's plenty of stories where God said, yeah, I'm done. We're done. We're going to let this happen. The Apostle Paul was stoned to the point where they thought he was dead, and he was whipped and beaten many times. Apostles all beaten, all martyred eventually. John the Baptist, head cut off. It doesn't always turn out the way we want it to. So the third pro tip is faith isn't about expecting God to save you from every harm. It's knowing you'll be okay even if he doesn't. All those people I mentioned, they're fine. Stephen, as he was dying, God opened up heaven and he's like, here I am. And he's like, oh, all right. Good trade. I'm all right. It was fine. Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego refused to worship the statue, knowing that God could save them. That's what they told Nebuchadnezzar. Hey, God could save us, but even if he doesn't, we're still not going to do it. Even if we die in these flames, we will not bow. I've got 3 commandments of the top 10 that say I can't, and so I won't. I just simply won't. So they knew God could save them, acknowledged he might not, and if he doesn't, they would gladly take the punishment. Okay, I'll lose my job. Okay, I'll lose my life. Okay, I'll lose my family member. I'll lose my friends who I thought were friends, and it turns out really aren't that close of friends because they all scattered when they started talking Jesus. That's what faith does. You stand anyway, even if it's alone. Just knowing God might help you through that. Maybe that friendship will be reconciled. Maybe you'll get a better job. Maybe that family situation will be healed later. And it might not. Either way, I will obey God. I will do what he says. Faith is knowing either way, you'll be okay. It's okay if you lose your life. It's okay if you get miraculously healed. Either way, you're already in eternity. You're just waiting for the time you see him face to face. It'll be okay if you lose your job or if you get a promotion. It'll be okay if you lose your friends or they become better friends. It'll be okay if you lose ties with family or don't. Now, these guys weren't exceptional, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They were just normal guys living out their faith. Their faith in an exceptional God. May the same be said of every one of us.